The launch. Now I'll start again. Welcome everyone to the launch of Cover Art, which is the first, not the first mystery by Vanessa Westermann, but it is the first in what many of us hope will be a long and very successful series by Vanessa Westermann. This launch is co-hosted by the great Sleuth of Baker Street bookstore. There is no finer murder mystery bookstore in all of Toronto. Well, okay, in all of Canada. Let's exaggerate maybe a little bit and say the whole wide world, English-speaking world. It's a great store and it's run by two amazing people, and we're really, really lucky this afternoon to be have Marian Misters from the store interviewing Vanessa. The conversation will last about 30 minutes and it'll be followed by questions. You members of the audience are invited to submit questions via the chat box. Be sure and you need to know that you can all purchase copies, signed copies of cover art from Sleuth of Baker Street. Before we start with the actual launch and the conversation between Marian and Vanessa, I would like to acknowledge that although we're gathering in a virtual space, we wish to acknowledge that all of us in Canada live on lands traditionally occupied by the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis of Turtle Island. We'd like to acknowledge the sacred land on which Cormorant Books operates. It has been a site of human activity for many thousands of years. In fact, when we first wrote this, we wrote 10,000 years. Now we're saying 15,000. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory is the subject of the One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and steward the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Takaranto, as it was originally called and may be called again, remains home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this community and on this territory. And we are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations. And now I get to talk for a few minutes about cover art. And sometimes people ask publishers like me, how do you come by books? And of course, there's the traditional, we come by books through the regular submission system. People submit their books, what we call over the transom, or their agents submit to us. And every now and then, really good booksellers email me and say, would you mind if I sent along a young writer to you? I'm really impressed with this manuscript and I'd like you to read it and maybe publish it, which is of course exactly what Marian Misters did with cover art and Vanessa Westermann. I'm so grateful that Marian did this. I don't think I've had as much fun reading a murder mystery submission in a long, long time. And then Vanessa and I met over Zoom, and we talked about the book, and it turned out I was giving her advice contrary to the advice that she'd received from so many other people. And at that point, we decided we wanted to work together. So we Cormorant acquired the book that way. Vanessa herself is an avid reader of mysteries. She's a former Arthur Ellis Awards judge. She holds a master's in English literature, as well as a Bachelor of Education, and has taught creative writing. Her debut mystery, An Excuse for Murder, was published in 2019. At the heart of all of Westermann's stories are strong female protagonists inspired by the heroines in Vanessa's own life. She currently lives in Ontario, and we are most grateful for it. Marian Misters, together with her partner J.D. Singh, has owned the Sleuth of Baker Street mystery bookstore for almost 40 years. Looking for a change from the life of auditors, they bought the Sleuth in 1982. Well, it's not almost 40 years, now it is 40 years, isn't it? When it was 3 years old. And as they say, the rest is history. Marian has a Bachelor of Mathematics, a Master of Arts, and is also a professional chartered accountant. She was the jury chair for the Crime Writers of Canada Arthur Ellis Awards and has been awarded the Derek Murdoch Award for her contributions to the crime genre. We are so grateful that she's made time to and have this conversation with Vanessa today. And now I'm going to turn off my mic and turn it all over to Vanessa and Marian.
Thank you for that intro, Mark.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks, Vanessa, for being here as well and chatting with me. So if you're ready, I've got questions.
Go for it.
Okay. First of all, I just want to tell everybody, I obviously loved the book because we wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't like the book, because I really can't talk to a writer, and then ask them questions if I didn't like the book in the first place, because I would feel awkward. But I loved your book. So we get into some of the questions. You can tell me a little bit more of the how, why, and when. And again, everybody, don't forget, there's a question and answer little thingy bobby on your screen. And if you have some questions, type them in, and Vanessa will make time for it at the end to answer them, or she'll make time for it at the end. So Vanessa, cover art is set in a fictional town in the Kawartha Lakes. Why do you think Ontario's cottage country is such an appealing setting for a cozy mystery?
Well, a cozy mystery, as you know, but I'll give this info to others who might not know, is a whodunit featuring an amateur sleuth, a distinctive setting, and a limited number of suspects that all have some reason for possibly committing murder and who all know each other. So the focus is as much on the sleuth's world, the setting, and her personal life as on the murder. Cottage country is appealing because there's the opportunity for conflict between locals and cottagers, but it's also a beautiful, peaceful getaway that so many people want to go to. So I thought this was kind of a really fun opportunity to set the cozy mystery in. I tried to weave a sense of wish fulfillment and yearning throughout the story, because I think that's something that everybody associates with cottage country. You're probably always thinking a bit about wanting to escape to this location. I know you do quite often because you also have a cottage, and I often do that as well when I'm not here. In cover art, Charlie is on the verge of giving up on her art, but she takes a chance and opens a summer pop gallery in cottage country. So that's why she returns here. Charlie and her sister Megan both actually inherited a 1950s cottage from their grandparents with a gabled roof, red shutters, and a lake view. But Megan is the one who has had the opportunity to build a life here because she's the local editor of the newspaper. And Charlie desperately wants to call it home too. So a little bit of background for those who might not have actually read the book yet about the setting is that it's actually in the heart of the Kawartha countryside. My fictional village nestles on the shores of Blue Heron Lake at a crossroads between barns and laneways, plowed fields, and sugar bush. Oakrest has the pace of a country village, but the quaint specialty shops and vibrant arts community of a city. It's only a 2-hour drive from Toronto, which still gives you the opportunity to take the characters into the city if you want to. There are waterfront cottages, Adirondack chairs, and boats cruising by. The constant influx of visitors arriving with the black flies and staying until the first red leaves fall from the trees provide locals with fertile ground for gossip. And I think gossip is something that's also very important in cozy mysteries. So when a man is found dead by chocolate, Charlie has to uncover the killer's identity before murder spreads its poison through the lakeside village. I wanted to give readers the chance to experience cottage life and whisk them away on a vacation to the lake between the pages of cover art.
That sounds really cool. So, cottage life is a really important part of the culture in Canada, and I love going to my cottage, and I'm there as often as I can. As a matter of fact, if I could remotely run the bookstore from the cottage, I would do that. So how or in what way your own cottage experience, how does it bring the setting of cover art to life, like the experience you've had at the cottage and going to the little towns around the cottage and things like that?
So my family has actually been cottaging in Ontario for generations, and cover art is actually dedicated to my grandfather because he loved being at the lake so much. Actually, he and my grandmother took their honeymoon at the family cottage back in 1945. And actually in a town very, very close to where my cottage is, he used to go fishing off of the bridge there with his brother. So I thought that was kind of fun history as well. But my brother and I grew up spending summers in the Kawarthas. So we had a childhood with school years bookended by going to spend summer at the cottage, eating s'mores around bonfires, diving off the dock, reading thrillers in Adirondack chairs while watching canoes drift by. And for a few years, actually, I drove an old red Jeep like Charlie's and down cottage country roads. And I frequently had to brake for deer leaping from the trees and once for a wolf. I've seen bears disappear into the thickets and heard coyotes yip at night. My favorite cottage sound is the loon calling to its mate across the water. I don't think there's anything else quite like it. So I tried to infuse all of that, this wonderful setting that we love so much, into the book with the hopes that readers pick it up and feel like they could wring lake water from its pages.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. However, the murder method in cover art is death by chocolate. Now, of course, I love chocolate. What kind of research did you do in order to give the reader a glimpse of how a chocolatier would work and make the chocolate and things like that?
I did actually have to do quite a bit of research. It was such a hardship for this one. In order
how
to
much chocolate did you eat over the whole time period?
Too
Anyway,
much, way too much. So in order to add all of those sensory details to Matt's chocolate shop and cover art, I had to learn so much about making chocolate. There's so many different aspects just about where you even can buy the chocolate, how you can use it to create the recipes. Sourcing chocolate is a really interesting aspect of it. And one book that I use, it's part cookbook, part just really interesting book about the history of chocolate, is David Lebovitz's The Great Book of Chocolate. It's really fascinating. But I also spent a fair bit of time browsing confectioners' websites, and there's some really fun ones to look at and kind of make you really hungry after you've done that. But part of the fun of writing is learning about topics that you might never have researched otherwise. For example, I found out a couple of interesting facts about chocolate that I ended up infusing into cover art. I found out that studies have shown that chocolate can induce euphoria and have a calming effect. And actually, European pharmacies in the past used to dispense chocolate as a medicinal drug. So I thought, oh, chocolate really can make you feel better, unless you eat an entire bag of Hershey's chocolates on a road trip. But if chocolate can be medicinal, can it also be toxic? I started to wonder, can it be sweet and bitter, delicious and deadly? And actually, the idea of a death by chocolate was sparked many years ago when my mom took part in a workshop run by a local chocolatier about how to make truffles and Belgian pralines. So she came home after being inside the chocolatier's workshop with recipes covered in handwritten notes and samples and a chocolate-stained apron and a behind-the-scenes glimpse into a chocolatier's workshop. We tried out the recipes in our own kitchen, chopping blocks of chocolate and tempering them into a glossy sheen. So I thought that was kind of just a really fascinating way of finding out what it's actually like in the back of a shop. You come in and you see all the pralines nicely laid out, but you don't really think about the entire process and the kind of speed that happens behind it in the workshop. So while writing cover art, I visited a few local artisan chocolatiers for inspiration. And the gin and tonic flavored chocolate that Charlie samples in cover art is actually a real flavor that readers can track down and try themselves from Warkworth, Ontario's Centre and Main chocolate shop. And I think actually that we have some chocolate from them to give away during this event, which will be handed out to one lucky winner at the end. The bar is made by chocolate and lime zest laced with juniper essential oil and coriander, and it's really incredible. It doesn't actually have any alcohol in it, but she tried to replicate the flavor of the cocktail, which I thought was really interesting. So I did a lot of chocolate sampling too, which, as you can imagine, was a really difficult thing to have to do for my research.
I remember I took a chocolate making course at George Brown College, and it was 6 weeks long. And I have to admit, by the third week, I didn't think I want to look at another piece of chocolate because we ate so much, because we had to test it, right, to make sure it's perfect. I mean, how can you choose the gin and tonic chocolate as a death method if you haven't sampled it all? It just makes
exactly.
No sense.
Exactly. And I like the idea described in David Lepovitz's book too, because he also has a bit of a behind the scenes look of an actual Belgian chocolatier's workshop. And I love the idea that they have this bowl of discarded chocolates that aren't quite perfect, that's put aside, that he was just snacking on the entire time as he was doing his research. So I thought that it's just, I don't know, so sensory, and everybody loves chocolate. So I thought that was a really fun way to include the murder method for the cozy mystery.
I think I heard or read one time that it could have been Laura Secord chocolates. They said, why do we worry about giving gifts when we know the majority of the world loves chocolate? So just give chocolate. I could, or a bottle of wine, of course, but I think it's a great idea. We'll just
Or both.
Or what, sorry?
Or both. I mean, there's a reason we have the bottle of wine on the book cover and chocolate in the book.
Oh, I'm looking at, for sure. Anyway, sorry, let's get back to the
Focus, right.
Focus, yeah. So why did you choose the title cover art, since we just saw the cover?
Yes, so cover art has the lovely connotation of both deception as well as not judging a book by its cover. So cover art is actually the name of Charlie's exhibit in the gallery. Her paintings look like Pulp Fiction paperback covers with a feminist twist. Her works feature female heroines and the everyday acts of kindness and courage that so often go unnoticed. And this is the interesting part. So stop me if I ramble on too long about this, because I got so into this research. There aren't many reference works, unfortunately, devoted to the history of the art of book cover design, because even though some really famous artists earned their bread and butter by doing these illustrations on the side. One of the few really recent books, actually, and I had to have this because, I mean, look at the cover, about book covers, and especially paperback Pulp Fiction, is The Art of Pulp Fiction. And it's really incredible. It's got huge glossy photographs in it. It's a relatively new reference work meant to bridge this gap. And the lack of reference works is partially because dust jackets originally were simply meant to protect books and to be thrown away. In fact, in the 19th century, keeping the jacket on a book was like storing clothes in the carrier bag from the shop where you bought them. And I'm sure, Marian, that's so different for us now, because as you know from the shop, a book is worth more if the dust jacket is intact these days. So it's such a strange thing that at the time they would buy the book and throw it away because it was worth nothing. So I thought this was really interesting with the history of cover design. I was doing a lot of research for that as well, to try to really describe the type of art that Charlie would be doing. There's one quote that I read in one of the other few reference books about cover art called Front Cover by Alan Powers that I really loved. He wrote, "A book jacket or cover is a selling device, close to advertising in its form and purpose, but also specific to the product in that it plays a teasing game of hide and seek with commerce. The reason for this ambiguity is that books have never been purely consumer goods. People become attached to them." So I really liked this idea as well. What fascinated me is that the gateway to stories is actually art. The best book cover designs have this quality about them that goes beyond words, that speaks directly to the reader. Book covers charm and they make a promise of thrills or happily ever afters. Now, what's really, really fun about the cover design that Nick Crane created for cover art is that if you look very closely at the cover, you'll see that the book on the chair is actually cover art. So the cover of the book is replicated on the cover on the chair, as though Charlie was reading her own book and then stepped away to investigate the crime. And I really like the way that plays with the idea of. So cover art has many reasons for why the book is titled that.
I know the cover, I think, is absolutely stunning because it just tells you what you're going to get. Like you say, it promises and it produces, you produce. But just a couple of things that I've got one customer here who will buy any book. Hound of the Baskerville is the book, but anytime it comes out with a different cover, he buys the book. He must have like 200 or 300 copies of The Hound of the Baskerville because of the cover. And the other thing is, when you walk into a store, what makes somebody pick up the book? Now, obviously, if they know your name and they know they're looking for cover art, but somebody comes into the store and they actually pick up the book because they like the cover art So I think you did a great way of explaining cover art, but also you got a great cover as well. And that I can't tell you how much that helps when somebody goes, oh, well, I just, you don't judge a book by its cover, but an awful lot of people do. So this cover designer in business, please, we want the next book, okay?
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at some of these books about the history of cover design. It's really interesting because, as you said, some books have different covers for different editions, and it's really interesting. Sometimes the illustrator, well, hardly ever, but sometimes the illustrator will actually know the story, but mostly it's just the gist of it. And then it's all to do with what aspect you're marketing as well. And I always think marketing is kind of interesting. So for me, that was really fun. And what's amazing about the paperback Pulp Fiction is that the illustrations are so incredibly vivid. And for the most part, they were hand painted, and some illustrators had the same models that they would use. One thing that I thought was really interesting was that often these illustrators would do these book covers to earn some extra income while they were doing other art, and they often would not earn that much. So it was very expensive to hire a model to sit for you. So sometimes illustrators would join a group and hire one model, and they would all take photographs or sketch the one model at the same time. So you would have a series of books by different illustrators who all had a character who kind of looked the same just because they hired them together. I just think all of that's so interesting. And of course, from Charlie's point of view, she's given a typical kind of noir Pulp Fiction paperback illustration style a bit of a feminist aspect in that she's highlighting women's lives at the same time. And I just thought that was fun.
No, I agree. So there was a quote. I'm going to read it so I get the quote right. But I found this quite interesting from the book. It's when Charlie gives Matt a tour of the art gallery on opening night, and she tells him this. So this is the quote. It's natural instinct to want to find the meaning behind an artwork, to raise questions and search for answers. To really understand an artwork, you have to pull it apart and figure out how the pieces fit together to make it whole. It's like solving a puzzle or a mystery. So maybe you could kind of talk about this idea a little more. Why did you choose to have your amateur sleuth be an artist?
Yes, so I started
Or
thinking
did you really
about
want
this.
to be an artist maybe, and you wanted to paint book covers perhaps?
Yes, I desperately would love to, but I'm terrible at drawing people. I'm okay at landscapes. So yes, I truly, truly wish I could draw better. I love art. I love going to art galleries, and that's something that my mom started when I was quite young. So I mean, it's one thing that was always fun for me is going to a museum and making up the story behind an artwork. And I think that that's so fun, just kind of imagining what else would be going on. I also did take art in high school and all sorts of things. So I like talking about art and thinking about the theory, but don't ask me to draw a face. So both art and mysteries are about perspective. I started thinking about this next actually while I was researching Ontario lakes and cottage life. So there's an interesting aspect about the name for Kawarthas. Kawartha is actually derived from an Anishinaabe word, and I hope I'm saying this right, I might not be, Kawatha, which actually means land of reflections. And the word was later changed by tourism promoters to an anglicized version, which is Kawartha, which actually means bright waters and happy lands. But I think that people still come to the Kawarthas to see their true selves reflected back at them in the water. And so as though this place holds some magical power of revealing hidden strength or fulfilling a wish. And I think that's a little bit of the magic about cottage country as well. This idea that you can kind of pursue maybe a passion or a creative aspect that you wouldn't be able to in your normal life. This sparked the idea of a character coming to cottage country to realize her dream of becoming an artist and living a better life. I started playing on this idea of the powerful effect of a change in perspective can have. And of course, perspective is essential for art, for the artist, but also the way the art affects the viewer. When we look at a painting, we're trying to uncover the artist's truth. And this got me thinking about perspective when solving a crime. When a sleuth gathers clues, she's trying to uncover the criminal's truth. All it takes is a shift in perspective to empathize with the murderer, to understand the motives, the mistakes that lead someone to take another person's life. And this is one reason why I love reading mysteries. I love that part of it. That sense of empathy is integral to cover art, but also to An Excuse for Murder, my first book, which I wrote from the perspective of both the amateur sleuth and the murderer. So that's why I picked an artist as my main character.
That's pretty cool. So the heroine in your first book, An Excuse for Murder, was described by the author Barbara Fradkin as the perfect heroine for our times. Wit, charm, and spirit balanced by impressive skills in self-defense and lock-picking. And I remember the lock-picking part of that book. I think it was kind of a really important skill to have at that moment in time. I think I'd like to learn how to pick locks, but anyway, so at the heart, I know, it's like you want to paint and make chocolate and
I think writing is part wish fulfillment because we get to do all the things that maybe we don't really know how to do in real life.
But honestly, isn't that why I'm getting off topic? But I think people read mysteries because they're vicariously living.
Oh, completely.
And you can choose to be the bad guy or the good guy in the book too,
which is fun as well.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, to get back to what Barbara was saying about your heroine in Excuse for Murder. It says, at the heart of all your stories are strong female protagonists, inspired by the heroines in your own life. So how did Charlie's character actually come to you? Like, how did you figure out what she should be like inside herself?
Yeah, so this one was a little bit, it was both complete inspiration and a little bit technical as well. So my writing process has always been character-based. I'll know who I want to write about before I know what adventures they'll have. And I know some do it differently. However, for cover art, my character development was a little bit more intentional than it had been before. I actually tried, since I teach creative writing, I tend to read way too many books on the craft. And in the end, I end up finding things that I want to try with my own writing. And I read James and Fry's book and decided to try his method of character development, which I thought sounded really interesting. So it's actually based on the qualities of mythic heroes, and his approach uses a lot of pre-writing and journaling techniques to create a hero or detective who has a ruling passion and psychology that develops from their background and their physiology. I thought this was really interesting. So her ruling passion, of course, that we've already talked about, is that she wants to be able to earn a living from her art. She has a keen sense of observation and is very perceptive. But there's a couple of aspects that you need to think about when you're creating a detective, hopefully one who will keep investigating through further books. So like most amateur sleuths, she's loyal to her old friends and lost causes. She's quick to help those in need, which is really important groundwork for future sleuthing. She also has courage, and here I was a little bit mean to my character. She'll act in the face of danger to bring a murderer to justice and will venture into the darkness even though she's afraid of the dark. So I couldn't resist giving a character who places so much value on her sense of sight, the fear of the dark, because of course, if she can't see, that most important sense to her is removed. And I make her go into the dark anyway, because writers are cruel like that. So as you can kind of tell, I'm a plotter, not a pantser. So a lot of the decisions were made before I started to draft the story. But I find then, as I write the story, the character comes to life on her own and reacts in ways that I might never have imagined beforehand. So when a character surprises me, I know that's when story magic has happened. And I really enjoy every minute that I've been spending in Charlie's company, and I really hope readers will as well.
Good. Well, I think they will. Now, but talking about Charlie, in cover art, you use two people to tell the story. So you have Charlie telling the story sort of from what she's seeing and what her point of view. And then you have Matt telling the story. Matt is our delicious chocolate man. And we have to go visit Matt, okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Soon. I'll be at my cottage next week. Maybe we'll see if Matt's around.
That would be lovely, actually. Yes. Too bad he doesn't exist in real life, but you know.
I know. But what prompted you to use the two voices in the book?
Yeah, so cover art is a cozy mystery, but it has a very strong romance storyline because I love reading mysteries, but I'm just as happy to read romance. I've always really enjoyed reading both. Especially the ones told from both perspectives. I know a lot of newer romances are often written in the first person from the female character's point of view, but I really like it when you can get both characters' sides because you can then have a lot more conflict and opportunity for conflict by kind of seeing the different their first impressions of each other, as well as the misunderstandings. And it emphasizes also that sense of longing that both characters feel, even though they're being, of course, kept apart. And what was really nice is that I could balance the darkness of murder with some of that humor and romance. And I wrote a lot of this during lockdown. So it was really nice to be able to add that brightness into the darker aspects of having a homicide investigation going on. And so the dual narrators also gave me the chance to show not only how the murder affects Charlie as an amateur sleuth, but also how a death by poison chocolate affects Matt, who is the chocolatier. Matt's always used making chocolate as a means to escape from grief. His mother died when he was young, and shortly after she passed away, a friend of hers took Matt under his wing and taught him how to make chocolate. Now someone has used something that has always been good and safe for Matt to kill. If I only wrote the story from Charlie's point of view, some of that emotional resonance would have been lost. And like chocolate, I wanted the story to be both bitter and sweet.
That sounds pretty cool. But anyway, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, let me say it this way. When I was reading the book, I felt like I knew some of your characters because I'm suspecting you obviously used people in your neighborhood, in your cottaging life to base these characters on. And just, I'm not going to give away anything, but I certainly, and I wish I had it here, but it's at the cottage. I know at one point they were drinking martinis in a very particular glass, and the glass just sounded exactly like my martini glass. So obviously, maybe I wasn't in the book, but my martini glasses were in the book.
Absolutely, yes. Rhinestone studded martini glasses at the cottage. Yes, that was definitely inspired by your martini glasses. I think there were a couple of other, of course, nothing is a true representation of a real person, living or dead. But of course, there are some things that inspire aspects of the book. Actually, one part that was really fun is that there is a man who lives on one of the fire roads who actually has a workshop that is like a green airplane hangar. And I remember years and years ago, when my family was first cottaging, we saw this green airplane hangar. We thought, oh, is it a seaplane? And there was a lot of discussion about what was going on there. And sometimes when you go past, you can hear all these sounds of drilling or sawing going on. You wonder what in the world is going on. And it turns out that's actually someone who does like cottage repairs or kitchen cabinets or things like that. And the workshop is just such a creative, interesting space that you go past, and it's been so intriguing for people. It was definitely something that I wanted to include in it. Another part that really exists that I included in the book is the seasonal one-room schoolhouse turned library. So that's actually inspired by a library that's on Kashabog Lake that is only open in the summer times because it's not heated. It has wooden floors that are constantly gritty with sand because it's close to the beach, and the kids run in with life vests still on and run to grab a book, and the books always come back and they're slightly warped and water stained. And yes, I worked one summer at that library, which is why I have a little backstory to add into the book as well. But I just thought it was such an amazingly cottage setting. The space is used by the Cottage Association to have their meetings. And it was such a fun thing that even though the librarian is not at all like the librarians who work there, she's totally fictional, the place itself really existed. And I think there's sometimes there are aspects that you see in cottage country where you think that would be perfect in a mystery, but it's almost so perfect no one would believe that it really exists.
I know. That's great. Well, I see that there are some questions that people have asked. I can't see what the questions are. If I touch the screen on my computer, I'll probably lose everybody. So I'm at the moment I'm finished chatting and asking questions, and then I can come back after the question and answer period, and we can wrap up. So Mark, are you gonna do that part? I can't.
Over to me, not a problem at all. Thank you very much for those questions, and thank you, Vanessa, for the answers. These are some of the questions that have come from the people watching and participating on Zoom. And so I'm going to ask them in not any specific order, what part of the book was the most fun to write?
Most fun to write. I had so much fun with almost every part of this book. I One thing that I love to write and I love to read is dialogue. I really enjoy the back and forthing between characters and the opportunity for subtext. And I think that that's so much fun when characters play off of each other. I think the scene I had the most fun to write because the character stepped into the book and I hadn't really visualized him yet. As I was explaining, I normally have a really solid idea of the characters and the character's backstory, but there's a scene where Matt first comes to visit the man who taught him how to cook and who was kind of a mentor role model figure for him. And he first comes to visit him in his workshop and they start talking, and I didn't plan any of it. I just wrote the dialogue in the scene, and they have an old friendship that goes on for a long time. So it was almost like the history was already woven into the conversation they had between them. And it's just a purely fun conversation as they kind of tease each other. There's a little bit of conflict, but there's also a past involved in it. And I had a lot of fun writing that because it felt like the character just stepped into the room with me and I suddenly knew he was it for the book.
And I have to say, as the person who acquired the book, that was one of the things I really liked. The characters were right there on page one, page wherever they appeared. They were already themselves. There was no sense of the writer was trying to figure out who the character was as we were going along. We knew who they were. They presented themselves in full. And that's really wonderful because it means it's very well imagined, that you've got a rich world inside. And it's one of the things that made the book really a joy to read.
Well, thank you.
Here's another question, and I did not enter this question. It comes from a real person.
Okay.
So you're gonna laugh because you and I have we've had a good conversation about this. What is a significant way, or what are the significant ways in which cover art has changed since the first draft?
Oh my word. All right. Well, Mark, you don't actually even know this, but cover art originally, a long, long time ago, began in a very early rendition as a pure rom-com. And there was an old, completely different book that the only character that's the same is actually Matt. And in this very, very early version, Matt owned a chocolate shop, and there was a plot line that didn't really work. The entire town was trying to cover up that his father was a writer who wrote a famous book under his pseudonym. And that's basically the only thing that stayed the same, except for the first chapter. The banter in the first chapter, the flirty conversation that Matt and Charlie has is taken from that book, and then everything else changed. And then when we had our conversation, I don't want to spoil anything either. Well, it was 23,000 words shorter. So one thing that did change is that there was a lot more description. Actually, I had a blast writing the description. Before you actually put that challenge forth to me of adding more details in, I never liked writing or reading setting that much. I'm the kind of person who skims over setting, except if it's used to show character. So when you gave me that task, I thought, okay, how can I do this so that it's as much fun for me to write as for the reader to read? Because I didn't want like a paragraph thrown in of just describing the setting because I was asked to write that. And I thought, how can I make every sentence of setting show something about the character? And that was the way that I made it fun for myself. So that's one way that the book changed. And it changed in another marvelous, magical way as well, from another aspect that you gave me that made me rethink the relationship between two characters. But I don't really want to go into that into depth because it'll spoil the ending. But that was brilliant. It just totally changed the book. And I had so much fun with our conversation about the editing process.
Well, you did tell me originally that it was a rom-com, and that you worked with an editor who said, tone down the murder, tone up the romance. And I
Which
said,
I was not to.
No. The romance will happen all by itself. Tone up the murder.
Yes, and actually I was written a long, long time ago. It was one of my first attempts to write a novel, and I just had so much fun with some of the banter and some of the story, which is why I went back to it and I thought I can do something with this. But I basically wrote an entire new book using some of those elements. But I read so many mysteries in the meantime, and actually I grew up reading more so mysteries than any of the rom-coms like Nancy Drew's and Agatha Christie. So I was so happy when it's like, yes, let's emphasize the mystery part.
Now that what you just said is a perfect segue into one of the questions we have here. Did any specific artwork, inspire this story?
Any specific artwork? Well, I definitely researched. This is an answer I should have prepared for because I have many artists that I did look at specifically for paperback Pulp Fiction. I have to say one thing that I spent a lot of time creating is one part that's very important for the mystery plot line is the cover image for the book that Matt's father wrote. And I made up this book. The book doesn't exist. I made up some of the lines that his dad wrote for it as well. And I made up the plot, and it's supposed to be typical kind of Pulp Fiction sci-fi novels. So I spent a lot of time looking up dust jackets that were created for science fiction novels, actually. And it was so interesting, the kinds of aspects that constantly come up. It's a lot of the emphasis on color, but then I really liked the idea of, I actually discovered that there were some books that were created to be tactile, that you had cutouts on the dust jackets that you could see a layer underneath and actually touch. And I really liked that idea. So I researched some pictorial photographs, which was something that I really liked from the artwork, that they're almost photographs that look smudgy like charcoal. And I liked that idea for the cover image, and then have the green inlay of the book itself show through the cutouts. And so I looked a lot of pictorial photographs and some of the original dust jackets, because I was trying to figure out why they might have created a newer edition, as Marian and I were just talking about how covers change, of why they might have stopped producing that dust jacket. And it's because those ones with the cutouts are very expensive to produce. So I think a lot of that went into.
Were those cutouts done for pulp Fiction as well?
Not really. I kind of took creative liberties with this. Yeah. So they would have been a bit too expensive to produce for them, but I liked the kind of layered meaning as well to the book cover with the cutouts that you could see through the green underneath. So I did take some creative freedom.
If I could just say something, as from a bookseller's point of view, we hate covers that have cutouts because people don't treat that little cut out part carefully enough. They lift up and they might rip it. And there's nothing worse than having a book which has got a cover which is ripped, or putting it back on the shelf and they're not careful enough. So I can understand the secrecy and the hidden, but as a bookseller, no, I don't want to cut out in the cover.
And for those of you listening, that's Marian's way of telling me as a publisher, don't do this ever.
Yeah.
And Marian, I agree with you, because I have the personal experience of owning a number of books where they do have the cutouts, and you do have to be so careful putting them back on the shelf. There's a great tradition. I'll come back to the questions in the chat box in a minute, but I'd like to ask this. There's a great tradition, and I don't know if you know this tradition, Vanessa, of made-up books inside of novels and other books.
Yes, one of my favorites is A.S. Byatt's Possession. She is amazing for creating all of the handwritten letters from the Victorian poets. I actually wrote my master's thesis on A.S. Byatt partially, and I just love what she's done.
So you're well aware of that wwonderful tradition.
It's a lot of work, though, for the writer.
It's an awful lot of it because you have to write in a completely different style. You have to write. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not clever. It is difficult. Okay. Well, another question is, why death by chocolate? And how does that fit in with the cottage lifestyle?
Okay. Why death by chocolate? Well, I guess that I've been watching a lot of Neil Gaiman interviews lately because they're just really, really fun to watch. And I like his video about how ideas come to authors and how you should never ask a writer where they've gotten their ideas from, because it's one of those terrifying questions that writers hate to answer. And he said that the only reason I'm thinking of this right now is because he said people wish that you could tell them you go to the basement and you find something that looks a bit like a chocolate and you pop it and you eat it and you get your idea. But basically he ends up saying that you take different aspects and kind of blend them together and create something that is a new idea and a fictional take on it. And I think I had a couple of aspects. So this early version of cover art the very, very old rom-com version, was actually not set in cottage country. It was set in the wintertime in Canada. And I was trying to think about what would, mostly I wrote cover art to be fun and to be fun for myself. So I think my first book, An Excuse for Murder, I was trying to write the types of things I like to read. And this was purely writing what I liked. And I was thinking, what do I like best? And I thought, well, I like cottage best. And I love this setting. And how can I take this setting and put it into the book? So that was a one separate idea, to have this cottage setting. And then Death by Chocolate, as I said, it was just kind of a fun idea sparked by the fact that my mom was actually invited to go to this chocolatiers workshop, and the fact that she brought these recipes home that you could then replicate. And that kind of led to the idea of, well, that's kind of an interesting way of poisoning someone, as crime writers do tend to think. So these were how those two things ended up meshing together. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure how exactly everything else came to be, because that's one of those mysterious creative process.
I would think part of it is that you absolutely love that chocolate shop in that little Ontario town, and just wanted to visit a number of times and sample a lot of the chocolates. And then you probably thought, oh, this one tastes like maybe I could poison somebody with it.
Well, actually, I did once. The scene is very, very similar, where Charlie actually gets the sample, because when I did visit Workers Center in Maine, at the time it was pre-pandemic, so they were still handing out samples, and I actually did get a sample of the gin and tonic chocolate before I bought it. And what's really fun, and it's nice that the chocolate shop is actually helping us with the giveaway, or providing the chocolate for the giveaway, because we're really promoting it. But it's a really wonderful, wonderful shop. And when you go inside, it's like a chocolate shop you've never seen before. So Matt's is a combination of two local chocolate shops. This chocolate shop is a lot fancier than Matt's. Matt has kind of a bit more of a down-to-earth take on it, but theirs looks like an art gallery when you come in. The chocolate is displayed on the wall just like art would be, and everything is very minimalist. And I thought that that was sort of a fun combination with art and chocolate as well.
Here's a great question. Milk or dark?
Dark. Definitely dark chocolate, as dark as you can go. But it was funny, because before I tried the gin and tonic chocolate, I would have said never white chocolate. But after I tried that, and there's actually quite a few chocolates that are based on white chocolate, and maybe it's the quality of the white chocolate. You have to get the very, very good kind to have a strong enough flavor. Otherwise, a lot of it, I've learned, is mostly the cocoa fat or the cocoa butter, which doesn't have as much flavor to it. But I am definitely now open to trying more white chocolate.
Ah, well, I'm with you. I still think white chocolate isn't really chocolate.
Yeah.
The byproduct of making chocolate.
Exactly.
Okay, now one of the questions is, what was, you talked a lot about doing a lot of research for the book. Was there anything you researched for the book that you found interesting, but ultimately it didn't make it into the book?
I think everything I research has a purpose. I end up using everything somehow. I end up, actually, what happens that I have to write a scene and realize I need more depth to it, or a bit more realism, and then I end up researching to be able to talk about it. And there's an astounding amount of things that you end up researching that are really strange, especially when it comes to some of the handyman aspects, because I'm really not a very practical person. I wish I had more practical skills, so I had to research a lot of things. There's talk about foundation and engineering and industrial aspects, and especially fixing and selling buildings in cottage country, which required an enormous amount of research. Yeah, so I think it all actually ended up in it. One really fun research aspect that was partially a little bit of inspiration as well, that I haven't mentioned yet, is that my mom has a friend who owned the Port Hope Inuit Art Gallery. When we went to visit her this summer, I was plotting cover art, which ended up leading to one artist creating art inspired by Inuit legends, because it was incredible seeing the woman who owned the gallery also worked with artists to create more awareness for Inuit art. And it's just amazing the way that the legends are woven through the artwork, and the style is very different too. So that partially, as another example of real life art that inspired cover art, was definitely something that really affected, especially also the way Charlie's galleries, because I actually got to be in a small gallery, and that was really interesting. And she would tell us how she was hanging paintings in the evening, playing Led Zeppelin as loud as you could get with her husband. And I just thought that was fun.
Well, there's a question here that is an easy yes, no answer, basically, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there chocolate recipes in the book?
No, but I did end up creating one for promotional purposes, which you can find on my website and was used for the blog tour. And it's actually a really fun one. That's a pretty doable one. It's basically got dark chocolate and white chocolate combined and some espresso in it as well. And it's one of those ones where you can really get your hands messy. You kind of roll them into truffles and put cocoa powder on top. So you can find it, but there's not one in the book.
Very cool. One of my favorite books, novels, is Heartburn by Nora Ephron, and it's punctuated with recipes. And I read it, thousands of years ago, basically, when it first came out. And I spent the better part of the summer every now and then going back to the book and thinking, I'm going to try that pot roast and see if it works. I'm going to try and see if, and it turned out her recipe for key lime pie is the best recipe ever.
Wow.
And it's right there at the end of Heartburn. It's the pie that Meryl Streep throws at Jack Nicholson in the movie.
Oh, that's so fun.
So here's an interesting character. Which one of your characters do you relate to the most? And if so, and if there is one you relate to the most, why?
Relate to the most? Well, I really, I think as a writer, we kind of put a little bit of ourselves into every character. I really love Charlie and Megan's relationship, and I think that I don't have a sister, I have a brother. I think I've given them both aspects of my personality that they can bounce off of each other. So I really enjoy them. But what's interesting is that when I write a first draft, Matt's character comes onto the page and you can hear his thought process, and I have to work harder at Charlie's, probably because of the thought that maybe people will connect me more to Charlie. So I hold back a tiny bit and have to go back in and just be honest and add her emotions into it as well. But I hold back a tiny bit and then I fix that on the next round through. But Matt doesn't have that problem. So sometimes I find I know Matt the first time around a whole lot better than I know Charlie, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's the way it is.
Here's a question, which in a way you've already answered, but I will ask it again, just because. What part of the book was the most fun to write? You said the dialogue. So
yeah, I'm trying to think of another example. What was another part? Well, yeah, the final showdown scene was quite a lot of fun in this one too, because without giving anything away, I didn't hold back. I know I was thinking that I wanted to have a depth to the mystery, but like a Louise Penny mystery. So there's a lot of emotions and a lot of conversation, but I also wanted to make it just fun for the reader. And I was thinking a little bit about how the cozy mysteries, where there's some kind of action-packed scene where there's some threat of danger as well. And I wanted to add that in too. So it was kind of fun just letting Charlie deal with a physically threatening situation, as well as the emotional aspect of exposing the murderer. Right. So that's quite fun.
So you did it, and you ended up more enjoying the writing of the murder aspect much more than several years ago writing the romantic aspect of the book.
Yeah.
That was obvious to me when I read the manuscript. Yeah. Okay, here's a kind of interesting challenge, and I think of it as a challenge because it's one of those questions that has a snappy answer. So I'm going to give the snappy answer after I ask the question, and then I will turn this over to you. If you had to describe Charlie in 3 words, what would they be? The snappy answer is, I wrote a novel about her. I couldn't do it in 3 words, but yeah. Do you have 3 words that would perhaps encapsulate Charlie?
Spunky, creative, and determined, I guess. Those would be my 3. But yes, I did write a whole book.
And do you have 3 words that you would describe Matt with?
Charming. I think I was going to say empathetic, but that's not quite the right word. Also not trouble. This is going really bad now.
He's a harder one to describe. And I
He
think,
is.
yeah, and I think we should stop there.
Okay.
And just leave a little bit of mystery as to what the book is
Okay.
exactly about, so
Yes.
that people will, rush off ideally to Sleuth and buy it.
Yes, because I find that Matt's character is revealed a lot through the process of the book, and you get to know him a lot more as it goes along. So he doesn't have quite a pat answer as much as the amateur sleuth.
Right. That's and because in a way the plot kind of involves him a bit differently.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're coming up to 2:00, and it is the end of the Zoom launch. So I would like to thank very much Marian for the questions and for being participating in this. And oh, thank you very, very, very much for sending Vanessa to us, Marian. I would like to suggest to everybody that there is no better way to spend a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon at a cottage than reading a book. It doesn't have to be raining. You can wear sunglasses and read outside. God knows when I was a kid, I spent a good portion of my summers reading. It's a great book. Vanessa, I'm so very pleased and proud that we published it. This is the point where if we were in a bookstore, we'd raise a glass of wine or champagne and say, congratulations. We're really glad you're with Cormorant Books. And I hope this book has a very long and happy life.
Yes, well, I'm so happy that I get to work with all of you. It's been such a blast, every part of it, including the ending mission. That was the best part, I think. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for celebrating the launch with me, and thank you to Marian, and also maybe consider popping by a local independent bookshop, because there's so much fun. You get to chat to people who really love books, and that's one thing that I really enjoyed about Sleuth. At JD and Marian, you can just go in and tell them that you're looking for a random type of mystery, and they will find the perfect book you didn't even know that you wanted to read and hand it to you. I also have a task right now that I need to announce the winner of the giveaway. And Tiana has put the name into the chat for me to announce, and the winner is Jen Roger. So congratulations. And Tiana has just put into the chat for you to see as well that she's got her email address there. So you just need to email her and give her your address so you can claim the prize, and congrats.
Very cool.
Can I say a couple of words?
Please do.
Okay, very quickly. I just want to say, Mark, thank you for being a very phenomenal independent publishing company with Cormorant Books. Vanessa, thank you for writing a really, really terrific book. And Tiana in the background, thank you for organizing it and putting up with all our technology issues. But it's because of people like you that if you weren't there, if you weren't publishing writers that are unknown and taking chances, and both of you writing and publishing, if you weren't there, I'd have to go and get a real job. And I don't know, I don't think I could do that. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you very much for letting me be part of all of this.
It's wonderful. Thank you. I do think book selling is a real job. It's not as easy as it looks.
Well, 40 years of it, it's getting, it's had its ups and downs, I tell you, but it's just a phenomenal business to be in. The book business is just, regardless of what side you're coming from, I think books are just so amazing.
Yeah, they are.
And publishers are so amazing, and independent, smaller publishers, and Tiana, who has the technology background to help me through this Zoom.
Yes, thank you very much to Tiana, who stepped in pretty much at the last moment. She literally started work with Cormorant Books last week. So she was an intern with us for 6 weeks before, but we're so very glad she's joined the company. So I guess this is the point we turn it over to Tiana, and she turns us all off, and we all evaporate into the ether. There we go. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.